YouTubers, if you are out there. Good evening, bonsoir, bonsoir to some of our other contingents. This is our first ever Double Vision discussion evening. And if you are watching this on YouTube, you've missed all the fun of the fair that we had just now with the notices and saying hi. And you will also miss the chance to interact with this evening because we are having group discussions and there will be questions and answers to our guest speakers. But the reason we've asked our two illustrious guest speakers tonight is because we know after hearing what they've got to say, you will be so tempted to come back to future meetings and actually get involved in the discussions. So the next one will be on Wednesday, the 21st of October, same time, 7:30 to 9 o'clock. And I'll tell you a bit more details about that at the end of this session. In case you don't know me, those on Zoom do, but just in case you've come across this on YouTube, I am Phil Wall. I'm the minister of two churches in South Wales, in Pontypridd and Treforest. So what is tonight all about? What is Double Vision? Those of you who know me might know that I love lists. And I'll try and keep it brief tonight. So 3 is a magic number and a holy number. So there are three reasons why we're trialing these evenings. One of them is a sociological reason. Some of us seem to be thinking that society is becoming more and more divided, more and more polarized, where people sticking to their own silos or their own tribes or comfort zones, and that dialogue between groups seems to be disappearing from view. I wrote a whole load of spiel about this to tell you, but as with many things, what the English try to do, the Welsh can often do better. And I listened to Rowan Williams on Radio 4 this morning, and he said this perfectly. We've forgotten how to learn. It takes time to learn other people, to learn how they work, to learn about where we've come from. One of the sadnesses about our tribalism is that there's often an assumption that where we are is obvious. It's right. We don't have to ask how we got here. I think Rowan puts it wonderfully. And if we don't learn other people, if we don't allow spaces to listen and to have dialogue, this is only going to lead to greater misunderstanding and more division and resentment, as we've seen with recent political debates here in America, across Europe. Secondly, it doesn't just benefit society, I think it benefits us as individuals. As Rowan Williams was talking about there, how we learn is through difference. There's a whole theory of learning called variation learning that talks about this. But it basically says we learn everything through learning difference. So we only know what the colour red is because we can also see, I didn't think about non-colourblind people, I hope they're not offended, but blue and yellow and white, etc. Or we only know it's a hot day outside because we have experience of colder days. The variation enables us to learn better. And so that when we learn about how other people see the world, it gives us a fuller picture and also helps us to learn, to reaffirm, to reassess our own worldview. And finally, theological. Listening to other people is central to the Judeo-Christian faith. The foundational Jewish prayer begins with the call to hear, O Israel, and for Christians throughout our scriptures. And there's the impetus to listen to the stranger, to hear the voice of God in others. One of my favorite stories, Road to Emmaus. 2 people listen to a stranger and then hear the words of God. And that stranger starts by saying, what's your story? Tell me what's been going on. To listen then is to love. And certainly as Christians, we're called to love all, even our enemies. Well, there are no enemies on Zoom tonight, only friends. But we're calling these evenings Double Vision because we're hearing from 2 different perspectives. They might not be opposing, but they will certainly be different. One of them of which will always be outside our Christian tradition. Now, often Double Vision is not seen as a good thing, and perhaps things might not be so clear-cut after this, but we're hoping that after we've heard from our speakers, the issue might be more well-rounded, that we might become more well-rounded. That is our hope for this evening. And speaking of hope, this very first session then is entitled Why There Is Hope. It's a bit of a play on John Cleese, because his current comedy tour is called Why There Is No Hope. Quite funny, but he kind of goes through politics, science, all sorts, and shows that everyone is useless and there's no point hoping anything. Well, in the face of that, how can we be hopeful? This was a question I was asking earlier today when I was trying to put a double duvet into its cover and failed miserably and didn't use entirely church language. And it was a question I was asking about 5 minutes before we started recording because we weren't sure if we could all be here. How can we be hopeful, not just in the face of double duvets and technology failures, but in the face of pandemics, lockdowns and recessions, of refugee crises and climate change? How does one be hopeful? Hope, something that's central to so many of our faith communities. How can we be hopeful? Well, to share their perspectives, not necessarily to give us any answers on that, we have two wonderful speakers. First of all, we've got Jane Brencher. Many of you will know Jane. Jane is a former teacher, former mayor, current councillor in the wonderful town of Pontypridd. She is dedicated to her community. She was, maybe is still the director of YMCA, is a governor at Coed Ylän, I think still, yeah. She's involved with numerous local charities and groups, not least of all Pont, which I know means a lot to her, and in which she spent some time in Bali in Uganda. We might hear more about that later. Jane also had the privilege of accompanying me to my first ever match at Sardis Road, and Jane and I have lived in the same house, just not at the same time. Jane, we are hugely grateful that you're here tonight and hugely relieved considering we had a few technical difficulties just now. So we'll come to Jane in a minute. And we've also got Andrea, Reverend Dr. Andrea Russell with us. And I won't say that Andrea's been a Jackie of all trades, but her career has covered quite a lot of ground, from solicitor, lecturer, Anglican priest, theologian, published author, mother of two. But her single greatest achievement, she told me, was getting a mention in my PhD. Though she was baptized, she's shaking her head, but don't believe it. Though she was baptized in what would become a URC church, she's been on a bit of a church crawl ever since. And she's currently at Queen's Theological College in Birmingham, where they train Anglican and Methodist ministers. And she's about to move to be Director of Ministry in the Diocese of Oxford. And despite her Anglican nature, she's not too bad a person, and she's also she's ecumenical to her core. Everyone is welcome here. I've had the let's say privilege of knowing Andrea since I was 20, and so I have a lot of dirt on her that I would like to share, but she has a fair amount on me, so I won't. So as a friend of St. David's Uniting Church and Castle Square, it is a great privilege to welcome Andrea too. But for now, you've had enough of me. I can't believe it, but I'm told I should say that. So we're going to start with our first speaker to offer her perspective on why there is hope. We hand over to you, Jane. Very excited to hear what you've got to say.
Well, after that big build-up, I can only be a bit of a letdown, can't I? So here we go. Thank you, Phil, and thank you to everyone for inviting me. I'm thrilled. I thought to myself, now where on earth do I start? And I wanted to start with something we've all started to do recently, reach for Google, right? Oh, I wonder, they'll know all the answers. I don't think so. But what it says is, if you were to ask about what gives you hope, because I thought, let's start with the concept, what actually gives us hope? According to Google, it begins with acts of kindness, sparkling mountain streams, smiling children, forests, and small towns. Now, I can't think of a better description of Pontypridd. Can you? Okay. So many acts of kindness. Well, I'll go into a little bit of detail on that in a moment. Sparkling mountain streams, especially during the flooding period. We had more rushing water down mountains than we would care about. Smiling children, yeah, I think so. I really do think so. When you go to the centre of our parks and so on. Beautiful forests that surround the town. And it's a small town. Now that is from the giant that's supposed to gather to all thoughts, the place that you would go to for knowledge. Not for me, actually. I prefer my own sources. I'm sure many of you do. But for most people, certainly under lockdown, the internet's become a massively important thing, and Google seems to be the gateway to it. And yet, it comes back to those very simple things that we have right on our doorsteps, especially in this town of Pontypridd. And forgive me if I'm a bit too focused on my town, because I'm pretty passionate about this town, as you know. Okay, so there's the backdrop to what I'm about to say. That gives us hope, and in this town we have it in plentiful supply. We really, really do. You know, why there's hope? Well, you know, how to get hope. Where do you get advice on how to be hopeful? Google will tell you that as well. But I've got a funny feeling we've got our own solutions to that. So let's take those little bits of guidance that I said. Acts of kindness. Okay. If you take January in this town, no, I'll predate it. Look at the Second World War. Okay. Now, we weren't bombed in the way that London was. We had medical people, Americans based here. But the Second World War had a profound effect on many, many communities. You only have to go to the services in the centre of Pontypridd Park on Remembrance Day to see the number of people that are gathered there and the genuine cross-generational support, and especially during the V-Day celebration. Now, I happen to be the councillor for the Graig ward, Pontypridd, and there were buntings everywhere. The whole community came out in an act of remembrance and acts of kindnesses, you know, in terms of remembering and supporting those who passed. So we've had some tragedies from the Second World War. We had the tragedies of the miners' strike. Now, you and Andrew weren't here for that period, I don't think. But you would have had your own view of it. But I can tell you from where I was sitting as a teacher in Treforest Central School, teaching the children of Unstable, where if you drove up one of the main streets there, 17 houses were for sale in one street. And what came out of that? Acts of kindness. With soup kitchens, you know, people giving clothes. I met some friends in Brighton, and they gave so much money from Brighton to Pontypridd. We had Italian families. You know, some of the people listening would be aware of this. They're still very friendly with this town. Acts of kindness and support. Then you've got, if you move on now very rapidly to the floods in January. Was it January? My head exploded. I've been a councillor for 3 years, Andrea, and I can tell you that within those 3 years, we have seen just about everything hit this town. The flooding came as a great shock. I remember standing in Pontypridd, and I saw a large white container, not with a lorry, a large white container, going past the Eglwys Bach surgery, careering towards the old bridge. Now, I don't know what act you would call this, because we had our headlights light up Zion Street, because that's where we were. It was about 3 o'clock in the morning, I think. And I felt in that moment that we were about to do something which gave us great hope, another symbol of hope in this town, okay, which was our iconic old bridge. But you know what? At the last moment, that container swiftly went to the centre and went directly beneath the old bridge. It did not touch either side of that bridge. It took out the bridge before it, went obviously under the road bridge, then it took up the bridge after it in Treforest. But that one moment was significant, and the town was decimated. But why am I talking about the flood? Because the act of kindness that followed, to me, showed me the strength of this community. Within a few hours, we opened up community centres. People were down there cleaning out the houses because many weren't insured, and food bags were set up. I had people drive, not I, we had people driving from all over the country just to bring stuff to these, you know, poor people who had lost everything. What acts of kindness, the strength in our community. So when we came to COVID, I was really optimistic because I'd already seen all of this evidence. So it comes back to those other things about what gives us hope, you know, small towns. And I can tell you now that at that point, it was the fact we were a small, intimate town, and the churches played a huge part in that. And I need to mention that. That's very, very important. But how it transformed despair into hope was an absolute privilege to see. I'm going to move on and widen it a little bit. It's interesting that when COVID came along, COVID-19, many of the same people who volunteered to help during the floods, suddenly, of course, and again, I have to say, many of them church members, suddenly became very involved with this whole thing of a COVID-19 volunteer group. So they became involved with that. Moving on rapidly through that, they were buddies, they did shopping, they did, collection of things for people. And in the backdrop of all of this, we had the poorest authority, or one of the poorest authorities in Europe, and we were still being able to build. So you could come stand, when Prince Charles visited our town, he stood in the middle of Taft Street and he was talking to shopkeepers like princes, that hadn't opened because many of them were closed for a year because of the severe flooding. But behind him, as you were having that conversation, were all the cranes. The rebuilding continued in the YMCA and the other offices and the bridge to go into the town. What an extraordinary image. Even when we're on our knees, we still manage to find that hope and that real positivity to move forward. I'm conscious of the time. I want to move on to very quickly how the community was strengthened by it. We've covered all those things, but the health workers and the bin men and the teachers and so on, never has the human spirit shown such a power of caring, a power of kindness, and a power of hope in those moments. When I get emotional now. My grandson has cystic fibrosis, and for me, the kindness of strangers during that time, when we were so desperate to keep him safe, it's hard to define. And I know what some of you will say. I know you will say, Phil, but maybe Jane, there's something you need to think about there. Maybe there was a greater power as well. And I'm okay. I'm sure Andrew will have something to say about that one. The street parties, Phil, we've had some good street parties, safely distanced, very sensibly. So neighbourhood, the buddy system, and I think we've had a lot of good come out of COVID. Instead of, I started with the internet, okay, and that's going to be with us now forever, good or bad. And I'm not a great fan, I have to say, in many ways. But what it's also done is taken us back to first principles. Who lives next door? Who's in my street? Who's in my village? And I love my street. I genuinely do. They're lovely, aren't they? Phil will tell you. We came together, we support each other. Nothing was too difficult. And morally, moral support, that was really important. And we don't just do it here. This may be one of the poorest towns, but in terms of hope, one of the messages I had I'm a trustee of Pont. For those who don't know it, it's the partnership, and everybody on this call will know it for sure because they've all given so much of it. But it's a community-to-community partnership with a place called Mbali in eastern Uganda. And I had a message through, and it said that lots of the women out in the villages, many of them, are, lots of orphans that they've taken into their homes, were starving. They didn't have enough food. So the first thing we did as Pont neighbourhoods, we told people that in our Pont family. And guess what? We got a lot of money. And we were able to buy soap. And we were able to buy a bag of food. And within days, literally days, of having that message, because they have COVID there too, and they certainly don't have our advantages, everything was sent out to them for money. So just to draw it together, if we go back to what I found on Google, okay, there we have it. Acts of kindness, our beautiful countryside, smiling children, forests, small towns. You can't have hope without faith, was a statement that I once read. And I have faith in my community that whatever life throws at us, we will always have hope and we will always come through it. And I think that it's a privilege, actually, to be a person in Pontypridd. And I'm sure everybody on this call shares it. Is that too long, Phil? I've got some images there, which I'd like to flash through. Is that 10 minutes or have I gone over?
It is 10 minutes. You're good.
I'm a teacher. I know my 10 minutes. Can I just show very quickly the images you see in front of you now? I'm not going to talk about them. I'm just going to tell you what they are. The first one with the high vis is me inside the YMCA, the new building, the phoenix rising out of the ashes. The right is me as mayor on VE Day, Remembrance Day. Bottom left, and this is one of my favourite pictures, and I leave it after these four, don't worry. When I first went out to Uganda many years ago, two young girls were completely orphaned, and they'd stayed in my home because they'd been brought up previously with a group that let them down badly in Pontypridd, took them all to their hearts and brought these kids in. There you see two young ladies and a small baby and a young man on the right. That lady, I adopted the two girls in a non-legal sense, but adopted them, got them through university with the help of friends, of course. Now the one on the left is an accountant, and the one on the right is now living in Germany and working in Salem and hoping with her husband Joseph to start an orphanage in Kenya. And the one on the right is a bus full of Ponty High students on their way to a village school in Uganda. That's what I'm talking about, hope. That's the human spirit, the extraordinary power of love and the extraordinary power of kindness, which for me is the foundation of hope, the hope that I feel and the hope that I know my community feels. 12 minutes, don't shout at me. I'm finished.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Was that what you were expecting, Phil?
I did not have any expectations for what Andrew would bring. I'm just grateful to hear what you brought, Jane. So thank you. We will come back. If you've got questions to ask Jane, do type in the Phil wall and the chat your questions, and we'll come back to that afterwards. But
and don't forget to be kind.
What's that, Jane? Yeah, be kind, of course.
Don't forget to be kind.
And I have to say that Jane's talk there, especially with the Mbali references, put me in mind of, well, it seemed to focus not just hope in our surroundings where some of us are in Ponty, and if you're not those people, I mean, there's no greater tourist advert there, but also hope in people, which it puts in mind the Bantu word, Ubuntu. That's it, Ubuntu. Which means I am because you are, that hope comes in community, how interconnected we all are across small communities and across the world. So thank you for that, Jane. We will be coming back to you, but for now, to give her take on the topic of why there is hope, it's my joy to introduce the Reverend Dr. Andrea Russell. Over to you, Andrea.
Thank you. I think can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
For some reason it's Jen, can you just pop yourself on mute? Otherwise fabulous. But for some reason I haven't got a speaker view of me. I've just got Jane. So goodness knows what this is going to do. I might have to put it onto gallery view.
We can see you, Andrea.
You can see me, but sadly I think the recording might be of all of us, so never mind. Well, thank you. And Phil, can you just stop with the Reverend Doctor stuff? Thank you. Hello, everybody. It's really nice to see you. And it's just so nice to see some faces, which is just lovely. I did a sermon for you a little while ago, I think, during lockdown, didn't I? And but I couldn't see you, whereas you could see me. So it's so lovely to see you. And I hope it's not going to be too long before I see you all in the flesh, but that's not looking too hopeful yet, is it? So I'm here to have a little think out loud, if you like, about what Christian hope might look like, and I want to come at this from I want to echo everything that Jane said, but I want to come at it from a specifically Christian understanding of what hope might look like, or what some of the contents might be. And I was having a supper with Dee Dee, who's on here, who's a friend of ours here at Queen's, and we were talking about this over supper. And she said, it's okay for me to say that I don't really have any answers. So that's where I'm starting. I think I want to say that if you talk to people about Christian hope, one of the things that will come to mind immediately would be the idea of what happens to us when we die. So Christian hope often has that future look. It's something about our belief that because of Jesus, because of the resurrection, death is not going to be the final word for us. And actually, death and decay is not going to be the final word for our world either. So I think the Bible talks a lot about a new heaven and a new earth. I think the idea of hope is not just for us as human beings, but for the whole of creation to be gathered up into God in whatever that might mean. So there's this future hope, and I talk about the resurrection for this because I think that for me, the resurrection says God's big cry to the world that violence and evil and death won't be the final word. That actually the final word will be God's, and that will be a word of love and transformation. So I think there's this future idea about hope. Things will, however it looks now, God is holding that and it will be different. But I think I also want to say that Christian hope has got something to do with the present and also something to do with the past. And I was thinking, as Jane was talking about whether there were some tie-ins here with things that she was saying, I think that the hope that we have within us says that this future hope, this future belief that love, that God will be the final word for us, isn't just about the future, it's about now. So we can live as people of hope and make space for the break-in, if you like, of those things to happen now. And I think when Jane talked about those acts of kindness, those times when even in the most dark of places and the most difficult of times, light shines in some way, that itself is a foretaste of what will come, but it's also real in the here and now. It is that, and I need those of you I can see to nod vaguely so that you think I'm making any sense. Viviane, I've got my eye on you here as my spiritual antenna, just to let me know that I'm making sense. So something about Christian hope having fruits in our lives now. I think I want to say that Christian hope is both something about how glorious we are as human beings, but I think it's also realistic about how absolutely awful we can be as human beings. So I don't think this is just about pretending that we're all good. And I think there's something here that I find comforting, that in the end, Christian hope is not simply about me relying upon you and you relying upon me, because reality says we're going to let each other down, but actually that God steps in and that God is aware of both our goodness and our evil sometimes, the shade within us, and that is no barrier to God acting. I was going to say redemptively. My goodness me, what a blooming jargon word. That things can be transformed. And that's why I think I want to say something about Christian hope then having this future view that death will not be the end. I think it's about having a view of that we see that break into the present, and also that future view gives us hope to live through some pretty rubbish times. I was thinking about people, particularly when Jane was talking about the Second World War, people still held hope even within concentration camps. But I think I want to say about how that affects our view of the past. I don't think Christian hope says that we have to pretend that everything is okay. and somehow that forgiveness and mercy mean that we just put we just pretend that bad things haven't happened. I think the fact that when Jesus is raised from the dead, there are scars on his hands reminds us that the reality of suffering is real. I heard from a friend today that her son, who is late 20s, has just been told he has terminal cancer, and he has got a 5-year-old little girl, and she's a Church of England minister. Hope doesn't say that that isn't awful. I think I also want to say that for some of us, some terrible things happen in our past, and we don't have to pretend that they weren't awful. But Christian hope somehow says that God will take the worst that happens and the worst of us, and that will be redeemed, that will be transformed, that love will, in some way that I do not understand, will have the final word amongst all of that. So you can look back on the past and the mistakes that we've made and the awfulness and not see it as a godless land, but see it as a place actually where God was and is and will be active. Now I feel like I've gone into some airy-fairy, arty-farty place that I need you to all come back on. So I don't know if I've even had my 10 minutes, Phil, but I feel like I need to end because I think what I'm trying to talk about as hope as being more than future, as having a reality in the present, and as being something that helps us to stay in God's presence even when the past has been almost unbearable. And that in the end, although I want to say that I think there's good in all of us, and I'm even going to say there is good in Donald Trump, but I am still looking for it, and I have to say that out loud. That actually in the end, Christian hope comes for me down to the fact of God telling us that God is with us, and that nothing, not floods, not the Holocaust, not my crappy lack of care for people, none of that in the end is too difficult or godless or too big for God. I'm going to end there, Phil.
Wowza. A huge amount there. The questions have started to come flooding in for Jane and Andrea. I have hope in them. So thank you, Andrea, for opening that up, for beginning to open the lid on the Christian hope and how it provides the lens from which we see our past, our present, and our future. I'm sure it's just got people's brains ticking over. Earlier on, I did my best to show you why I should be a host of this thing and not a speaker, because I got completely flustered and completely forgot the word Ubuntu. And I think I also gave an incorrect definition. It is, of course, I am because we are, the interconnectedness of Ubuntu. So that was a deliberate example of why I'm not going to be the speaker in one of these things. But for now, it's over to us. In a couple of minutes, at 15:15, so you've got a few minutes, at 15:15, you're going to be put into a couple of groups for you to think of and discuss the following questions, which I'm hoping will appear, as if by magic.
Phil, can I just ask you, sorry, do you want me to still be recording this, or would you like me to stop now?
You may as well stop now, because those who are, if they're seeing it on YouTube, will see the questions now, I guess. So okay. YouTube, bye for now, and hopefully see you in a minute. And welcome back, if this is working, to those who are watching this later on YouTube. We've just had our small group chats, and we've got a time of questions and answers to our main speakers now. before we bring this evening to a close. So we start off then with a question from one of our speakers to another. And I don't know, Jane, if you want to ask Andrea your question. You'd have to take yourself off mute first.
Okay. Thank
Great.
you very much, Andrea. I thoroughly enjoyed listening to you tonight. Really got my thought processes working. But this is a question that's always something I've always wondered about very much. Can you have hope without faith? Is there something in each one of us? Have I got faith? Is that why I have so much hope? And is it just that I don't recognize, I don't? So, question very simply, can you have hope without faith?
Wow, thanks, Jane.
I don't know.
I think I want to say, oh dear, this is going to sound like the real teacher in me. But faith in what? I think I was trying to look at hope from the idea of Christian faith, and what Christian hope distinctively looks like. But we're not the only people who have hope. I think if I spoke to Muslims, if I spoke to Jewish sisters and brothers, if I spoke to a Hindu or whatever, that people of other faiths also have hope. Yeah. I think also people of no religious faith also have hope. I think it shapes differently. I think it can be often about the hope that human beings are getting better, that we're progressing in some way, and so forth. So I don't think that faith has a monopoly on hope. I think what I want to say is that Christian faith offers a particular view of hope, if that makes any sense.
If I can come in there then and just open that question up a bit, because it's very similar to one of the questions the groups were looking at. And so this I'm putting to both of you, although I didn't give you a warning about this one. But do you think, one of the questions we asked the groups, do you think that being hopeful is a character trait to something you're simply born with? Or do you choose to be hopeful? Is it a belief, so part of your faith, or learn to be hopeful? Is it something innate or something you can choose, learn, or believe in?
In my experience, I think it's like many other things. I think it's a balance between life experience and some sort of inner, it could be genetic. It's because I've looked at people who are very, very hopeful and optimistic and upbeat all the time. And then I've looked at others who are really quite negative and lacking in hope in many ways. And it's quite difficult to see why one person is like that and one person like another. But then when you look sometimes beneath, you can see maybe someone's life experiences has created that sort of negative, almost like they're expecting everything bad has happened, and therefore, why would you not expect anything bad to happen in the future? Just a guess.
Thanks, Jane. Andrea, did you want to comment on that?
I think there's a difference between hope and being cheerful.
Yeah.
So I think I want to say that I think being cheerful and being a glass half empty, glass half full sort of person is often a bit of a character trait. You're grumpy, Phil, I'm not. That's just how it goes. I think that's different. And I think being optimistic, it's the same thing, isn't it? I think I want to say that Christian hope is a bit of all those things. I think, in the past, our sort of foremothers and fathers in the faith talked about Christian hope as a virtue. And that seems to suggest it's something that we have to work on, actually. So there's something about remembering that goes on through the Bible. So, God is always saying to the children of Israel, look back and remember, look back and remember. And in the same way, the Christian understanding of Holy Communion is that look back and remember, so that you remind yourself of God's faithfulness. So I think there's something about a virtue growing in you. I think sometimes hope can be a gift, actually. I've seen people in what I think is really desolate circumstances who seem to have more hope than I have. And I can only see that as a gift sometimes. I don't understand it. Does that answer it? I can't remember. I can't remember if I was going to say anything else. So I think it's, and I think there's an experience. I think, again, it's that remembering. I think in times of real awful darkness, you have to remind yourself that you're not alone. I think there are just other times, I think, when God just holds on to you and you don't even know about it.
Thanks both. Okay, another question that came to Jane was that, Jane, you were speaking a lot about hope in people and the acts of kindness that are shown, especially in times of adversity. And someone was asking, how do you keep hope in people when some people can commit the most atrocious of acts?
And that caused me to reflect on my own life. And there have been times in my life where I've been bitterly disappointed and couldn't quite understand what the situation was and why it was like that. And then I think you go through different phases, don't you? I think the first thing is self-reflection. You think, hang on, what did I do? Was that something I did? You know, am I responsible for something there? And then I think the process follows through. So then once you've had that self-reflection, you become stronger and a little more independent because you want to protect yourself from that happening at some point in the future. That's not always a good thing. But I think fundamentally, life then shows you other examples while you're getting through the hurt of people who do kind things and nice things. And gradually that hurt is pushed aside by the kindness you see in others and the hope that you experience generally. So I think it's a pain you have to experience. And often you look at the situation of that person and you understand why, and therefore it doesn't dent your hope. It actually gives you a little bit more understanding, and that makes you a better person, I think. So when people let you down, and and I will say I have been badly let down in the past, but you just brush yourself off and move on. Because fundamentally, if you believe people are good, and you see more experiences of goodness around you, gradually it becomes further into the distance, and hope just flares back up, and you're off again.
That's something to be hopeful for.
Oh yeah.
Andrew, did you want to respond to that one, or I've got a question for you?
I'll respond to it really briefly. I think this one's a really hard one, and I think it's I think it's not just what others have done to me. I think sometimes you look at your own life and realise how you've let people down.
Exactly.
And again, I think on that, I think again, I'm coming at this from a particularly Christian viewpoint, but something about forgiveness and mercy play a role. I think I probably said something a little bit about this in the talk, didn't I? That in the end, I think this is that God. This isn't dependent upon us rising up. This is dependent upon God rising us up. So perhaps that's a bit different. I'm not sure now.
Well, seeing as you're not being sure, and
thanks.
This group is all about not being sure.
Thank you.
A wise woman once said, "It's better to be wrong together than to be right on your own."
Oh, I wonder who that
was. But one question that was given for you, Andrea, was, can little signs of hope be enough when there are such big examples of things which make us feel hopeless? For example, climate change.
We started to talk about this a little bit in the group, didn't we? Because you'd had this question through. I suppose enough for what? Again, I think I want to say that for Christian hope, I think I'm basing this upon the reality of the resurrection and the triumph of love in that way. So therefore, it may not be by evidence for now, but I think as I'm saying that, I'm also picking holes in my own argument. But I think as I'm saying that, I'm also wanting to say that I I don't know how to say this, but I'm not convinced that size matters. Although I can't believe I've just said that out loud on this. But that actually, I think there's almost a belief in the Christian understanding of the Jesus story, that actually this man in this small little insignificant place that looks nothing has this tremendous effect upon the world. And therefore I want to say those little things we see may, in the whole God story, have more weight, more power, more transformative love in them than all that crap.
So kind of the mustard seed.
Maybe. But I have got lots of stuff going on in my head saying it's one thing to talk about that in sign of climate change, but if we were talking about this in regard to child abuse, I appreciate that we're in a very different territory and not minimizing actually suffering and pain, and actually you could even say that with climate change, couldn't you? There are people's lives are ravaged. So I'm not trying to eradicate that. I don't know if that answered that for the person really, but
well, Jane, I don't know whether you had a response to that. You know, when what about the little signs of hope in the face of huge challenges for humanity?
I think the first thing that came to mind, I was trying to think of the quote, maybe you can help me out with this, that each small act makes a huge difference, because we have those small acts accumulatively. And I think of climate change. When I saw a village being decimated, all their crops destroyed after a 20-minute hailstorm, which is directly the consequence of climate change and the way we behave in the West and the way it affected, it broke my heart. I've never seen anything so tragic. But then people scurried around and they picked up bits of tin, and then I remember thinking, okay, climate change is a huge, overwhelming thing, possibly one of the biggest things to face at the moment. But then each small act, and then those kids going on, you know, demonstrations and so on, those small pockets of hope, going back to that, I think, even no matter how big the problem, if you can see those seeds of actions, those seeds of kindness, and those seeds of, a common acceptance of something, then really, even the biggest challenge can begin, you begin to think about ways towards a solution.
Mm. It puts me in mind of the words of some vegan teetotaler from West Wales who said, "Do the little things."
Yeah.
So perhaps if we all did the little things when it comes to all of these matters, from spreading a small acts of kindness in our neighbourhood to climate change. Sorry, go on.
And Apollo, who heads up the pond system in Uganda, on my first video, I was really, really upset. It was so overwhelming. All this terrible, I couldn't begin to find the word. And we were walking by the side of the river, and he said to me, "You can't change the world, Jane, don't try. But every little thing that we all do will make a difference." And I look back 50 years later, and that was very, and so I think in that backdrop, I think we can't be overwhelmed by things if we begin to see those seeds of hope.
Well, with that, my last question for each of you then will be, how this week, when we leave this chat and we go about our daily business, how can we be signs of hope in our workplaces and in our lives? What are your top tips for us? No pressure.
I'd say
Andrea's been very clever. She kept herself on mute until you started speaking there. So,
very good,
Jane.
No, you go ahead by all means, Andrea.
No, you go first, Jane. I want to hear what you're going to say.
Okay, I think the key thing is to live your life. Don't just, for me as a politician, and I hate that word about me because I'm not by nature a politician. It just happens to be the vehicle by which I find I can change more things. I think you've got to lead by example. And what was the question again, to be exact?
How can we be signs of hope in our
Okay.
lives?
So yeah, absolutely. In terms of this sort of applying religious belief as well, I think it's important to lead by example, and I think it's important to look at the positives wherever, when everybody else is wailing and gnashing of teeth, that we can pick up the little kindness act. So to be optimistic and to lead by example, and I think to be tenacious, so many times in life, somebody says something horrible and I cringe and I think, oh, shrink back, go back behind the parapet. But then you think if you could just keep going and just persevere, then others will see that, okay, and then maybe they'll follow. Or actually, I've got a lot more people I follow than follow me, the truth be told.
So kindness and perseverance from Jane. Thanks, Jane. Andrea?
Lead by example.
Lead by example as well, yep.
I think I want to say something about being honest about life, so that what we give space for is hope rather than pretending, I think. And I think it's often that picture of I'm always amazed when you walk around and you see flowers coming up through concrete, and there's that idea of when you see them, if you then can chip away at the concrete around it, actually it gives it some more space to come up. So I think it's to be people of hope. I think it's to be honest and to allow that honesty to lead you through to something that is about giving hope space. So I think that comes that idea of virtue, and I think it is connected to stuff like growing gratitude in us, and that bit that we've talked about already, that actually we can't do huge things, but we can do small things. And I think, and sometimes we have to do that on behalf of another, because I think there are some times when even the small things are hard for us. So I think it's about community, which has kept coming up. I think it's about space, and I think it's about honesty.
Well, I can honestly say that tonight has been a great evening, a lot of food for thought. We'll thank our guests in a second. We might, other places where you might seek or find some hope. Next week, that's next month, sorry, our next double vision evening is going to be Black Lives Matter in Wales. The details are on your screen there, and hopefully the conversation that we will have there will be hopeful, but other ways as well. I mentioned Rowan Williams, so I recommend listening to Start the Week from this morning, where Andrew Marr was speaking to Marilyn Robinson, the novelist, and Rowan Williams, and they touched upon a lot of these issues. You might want to, if you want to read a bit more, especially about the Christian understanding of hope, you might want to look at Surprised by Hope by N.T. Wright. That might be a place to start. If you just want half an hour of hope in humanity, acts of kindness, and the type of things that Jane touched upon, I heartily recommend the TV show A Special School, all about the special needs school in Penarth, and it's a beautiful show that will give you hope in humanity. So next month, Black Lives Matter in Wales. We've got 2 guests lined up who are going to offer their personal experience about being Black, Indigenous, or a person of colour in Wales today, as well as some 2 fascinating perspectives on the Black Lives Matter movement. For now, all it leads me to do is to say thank you. Oh, you've gone over there now. Thank you to our technical team, which was tonight just Claire. Thanks, Claire. But also Bethan for all the advertising and publicity. We're very grateful. Thank you for everyone on Zoom, and if you're watching this on YouTube, for participating. It's good already. It's good to see that this conversation has gone beyond just our church, just our little silo or comfort zone. So it's great that others have got involved. We hope others more will do on YouTube. And a huge thanks to Jane and Andrea for being I won't say the guinea pigs, the pioneering women who have ascended this mountain of double vision and have done so with grace and flair and shared their wisdom and experiences and humour. We are very grateful to both of you, so thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much for asking me.
It has been an absolute pleasure.
And thanks for all the patient listeners out there. Thank you.
We are grateful to them. And I shall finish then with a quote from the African theologian Augustine, who said the following: "Hope has two beautiful daughters. Their names are anger and courage. Anger at the way things are, and courage to see that they do not remain as they are." So this week, may we be hopeful, angry, courageous, and blessed. And hopefully we'll see each other, if not before next time, when we'll look at our next subject for Double Vision. But now, those on Zoom, you're welcome to stay, you're welcome to go. I'm off to get myself another bit of water. Go well, God bless,
Thank you.
and thanks for coming.